Guys, this is Mark. In this video, I will review a new API that provides the functionality of retrieving a specific object by its object ID. Very straightforward. There are some additional parameters you can specify. We will review them in detail as well, but let's talk about object ID first. It is a special property that is assigned by Backendless whenever you create an object in the database using the API that stores new objects. Whenever you import objects or data into Backendless, you can optionally have object ID already declared in the CSV files that you use. I believe in lecture 14 we did the import, and if you take a look inside of the zip file that you downloaded, there will be CSVs, and each CSV has a column object ID. So it is a value that uniquely identifies an object in the data table that it's stored. So the uniqueness of object ID must be maintained within the table where objects are. So retrieving an object by its object ID is exactly what it sounds like. You provide object ID, you get the object back from the database, and then the question is when that functionality might be useful. The scenario that I came up with, and that's exactly what I will demonstrate, is consider a product page. So you navigate, and it doesn't have to be a traditional web app page. It could be a screen within a mobile application that is also addressable with a URL. It would be very similar as with web apps if you are going to build mobile applications with Backendless. So consider a product page that has a URL, and inside of that URL there is a parameter that identifies the object or a product that needs to be rendered. And that identification can be done with the object ID. So we will create a page that will display details of a product identified by an ID that is present in the URL. Let's take a look at the database first, just so you can see what objects we're going to be working with and what object IDs are in that data table. For this, let's go to the backend section and navigate to the data screen, and let's take a look at the product table. And this is going to be the data that you imported in lecture 14. So here in the product table in the schema, there is actually in the schema doesn't even show object ID because it's a system level column. But in here in the data browser, you will see that there is an object ID right here. This is the column. And these values are the ones that were brought over from the CSV that you imported. Well, you imported the zip file, but the zip file contained the CSVs. So as you can see, these IDs, they just go from 1 to 200 because we have 201 objects in this table. So now let's create a page that will be retrieving these objects individually using the ID that is specified. For this, let's switch to the front-end section. And in the front end, we will create a new page from a template that is already present in the Backendless marketplace. So move your mouse over this area and click New Page. Make sure to select in the Create From, select Marketplace. Let's assign a name to this page, and we can call it Get by ID. And you will need to find this template. So lecture 24, which is the current lecture, it says Retrieve Object by ID, and you can see that the name is Retrieve by Object by ID Lecture. Select this one, click Create, and that will create a page that has all the functionality that we need that demonstrates how retrieval of an object by ID works. Let's just jump into the logic to see what it is about. For this, select the actual page. Make sure that it says page here in the upper left corner, and then navigate to the logic section of the page. In here, this is the functionality that we have. This is the logic that we have. And the way this page will work is consider running the page. And let's just say that the URL of the page includes a parameter called ID equals, and then the ID of the actual product that we need to load. So whenever you run this, and by the way, this is pure UI Builder. We haven't even gotten to the API yet. So in UI Builder, whenever you run a page and it has one of the URL parameters, those parameters are going to be processed by our UI SDK and presented to you in the page data store. And in there, we can just get the property ID, which will be the value from the URL. And then we turn it into a text. And this is the actual API we're using, get object by ID. So in here, you specify the name of the table where we will be retrieving the object from and pass that object ID, specifying to the database that that's the object that we need. What's going to come back is the actual object with all the properties. And you can restrict those properties by this properties parameter, and you already know about it because we talked about specifying specific properties, or you can exclude properties. So the same thing that you already learned about requesting specific properties or excluding properties applies here the same way as with the other API. Also, there are references to relations. Since we haven't even touched relations in this course, let's skip that. Once we go into the relations, all of this will be covered again. So what happens now is this returns the actual object. And what we do is we take this object and we put it into page data with a property called product. Okay, so now that object sits in page data. And then in the UI, we do have this little, it's not really a form, but user interface that renders individual properties. So we will be rendering product name, vendor price, rating, and so on. So what happens is for these individual labels, and once again, this is pure UI builder, it's really not relevant to the API itself, but it may be worthwhile looking into it. So these individual text components, they use data binding to display the value that sits in data model. And for this, to see how that works, select that label, go into the logic, and you will see that the content logic is bound to product.title. And this is a new thing if you're following along and you haven't taken the UI Builder course. What this does is it basically provides a path to the property that needs to be rendered. Title is one of the columns, one of the properties that comes back from the backend, from the database. And then we take that object and put it into page data with a property called product. So the full path to title, which will be the name of the product, is going to be product, and that's where the object sits in the data model. And then we put dot and the name of the actual property. So, and the same thing is true for all others. So for instance, with price, it's going to be product.price. And by the way, this product right here, it is referenced, I'll just to kind of put it all together, it is referenced in the page logic when we retrieve this object, and notice we put that object into the product property. So then product dot will give us access to all the properties of the object that was retrieved. Then, and that's all there is to it. By the way, there is some additional error handling, like such as if there is an error, for instance, if you open this page and then there is no ID parameter, there's going to be an error. We handle this error, put it into data model, and we just render that there is an error. And this is how it works. Let's just run this page, and I will move my browser so you can see the actual URL. And here you see that this is the URL. There is no ID parameter. As a result, there is an error to say product not found. However, if you add the ampersand and then say ID equals, for instance, 100, then now we have the ID, object ID, but we're using ID parameter in our logic. We know what object to retrieve, and we're retrieving this object. Let's also open the network tab in DevTools and reload this page. So in here you will see that this is the API call, and the actual URL of this is going to be, well, this is the URL, it references the product table, and then this is the ID of the product, of object ID of the record that we need to retrieve. And in the response we get that object. So notice that these are the properties: title, price, category, that we are referencing in the individual table, in the individual labels. So that's generally how it will work. And then this functionality is fairly common, where you want to have a unique URL for something that is displayed in your app, such as product, perhaps an order, or whatever really makes sense. And then we covered codeless here. However, for anyone who works with code, the API is going to be defined by object ID. It will have exactly the same parameters where you identify object ID, relations, and properties, and so on. And very simple API, but it's quite useful specifically for the use case that I have demonstrated. I do hope you found this lecture useful. And if you have any questions, of course, please leave a comment for this video. And once again, thank you for watching. And as always, happy coding.